chop those down usually, and then you can't understand what the product is. Moving back over here, statement frequency is quarterly. We can have monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, annual. And if you do quarterly, semi-annual, or annual, you can pick the month in which that starts. And so the idea is to accumulate information over the period of time for that one contract, and then when it's time for statementing, when you run statements at the end of that period, whether it's semi-annual, annual, quarterly, or monthly, it'll pop up. And it'll do actually the statement rendering properly. Okay?
Oh, sounds good.
Okay. Now, we've check-marked this. Please ignore this thing here. It's almost something that we're going to get rid of. We just don't, we have nobody using it, and it looks like it's an old thing. But it's when we have multiple recipients for a single product, and they want to take a percentage of the, you want one calculation and take a percentage of that for each individual. And it actually belies the whole system when they do that. It makes the system very one-dimensional. So what we generally do is just check mark this one, calculate royalties based on recipients, the recipient's contract rate tables, and we're going to see that here in a second. We can go up here and check box something like do not calculate royalties if the sale of the product is less than the cost of the product. Now the presumption, of course, in your case is that somehow we put in some cost, and there is a place to do this without worrying about too much of the inventory. You can just say the cost of a product is $2.25, stick it in the inventory system and be done with it, or you can load inventory into our system and load the cost along with that layer of inventory and blah, 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 and it works just fine. And that cost also is part of that POD cost if that's the choice. We can, so we can check box that, uncheck it, whatever you want it to do for each contract. Include the complementary sales to calculate royalties. Well, not too many people do that, but it's checkboxed here for our demonstration. Now we can hold royalties or reserve for returns. If we hold our royalties for this contract, we just click that checkbox. We can either then, or we can reserve an amount for a period of time, or we can reserve a percentage.
Right. That's
now
right.
we're adding a new feature here that's going to go up in this area that tells you how many periods to hold it for, from period to period to period to period. And that was something that we brought up with a new customer of ours, that we're going to add that function. So reserving an amount currently is a little more difficult. You just have to put the amount in, and then when you don't want to reserve anymore, you take it out. So we're going to put in a little thing that shows the periods where this takes place. So generally speaking, the reserve only operates over a period of time, and once that happens, it'll quit reserving it. Now, what does that mean? That means the first 3 months of a quarterly statement, let's say the first 3 months you pay him, the next 3 months you expect some returns, you're going to reserve for returns 10% of the total value of his royalty statement for that period, and that 10% will then roll forward to the third period and on until that reserve is depleted.
Okay.
One of the things we can also do is actually, the author says, look, I've sold so many good books lately, this new book I'm going to write, I need to get higher payment based on all the sales of all the prior books, or 3 of the prior books. So that's what this particular screen does, is that we can combine multiple products for, we can add as many as you want, and go up in here and put in a title, whatever it is. I don't even know what to put in. I have 7,000 titles, but anyway, we can put in one-to-many titles that say, go accumulate their total life-to-date sales or year-to-date units so that they can add into the rate table for this particular contract. I'll show you what that means. So that's no big deal. Combine these product sales for maximum royalty percentage. That's what that basically means.
Okay.
We'll move on. Rate table. This is the fun part. This is where the actual definition of how you want to calculate begins. Select the royalty category to enter or review. This is the rate table. Now let's see what that means. I'm going to just click on one simple little rate right here. Domestic sales. Let's just read these columns. Royalty category is a domestic sale. This is the code right here. A, and this is the description. So the code can be anything, and the description can be what you need. The calculation method is one of these functionalities. Obviously, we understand net and we understand list. Flat rate is on a per copy basis, a per unit sold basis, regardless, $1.25 per each. A distributed calculation is when we are doing net calculation minus the distributed cost.
Right.
A none means we don't calculate royalties for this category. Let's say author sales, any sales to an author, Eddie buys a book, we don't pay him royalties for it. I don't know if that's true or not, but that function exists. And here's your print on demand calculation, where it then takes those values that I showed you in the product master and does the calculation based on that. So a POD actually is a net calculation minus the POD costs before it does the calculation for the royalty percent. The units are based on, well, I'm using units right now, life-to-date or year-to-date accumulation. Could be one or the other. I don't know anybody that does year-to-date, actually. We can do it based on the quantity or the net extended amount accumulated over this period of life-to-date or year-to-date. Now we'll bypass this column for half a second. We'll go here. Here's the breakpoint. So one to many, one and greater sales will be calculated at 15%. That's the simplest thing you could ever do right there. Now let's make this a little harder. One of the things we can do is say the first 500 books gets 0.
Right.
I'm just going to add real quick semi-annual range.
Correct.
That's when the statement is rendered. Now, we take in both sales and credit memos or credits from Ingram, and that's automatically netted in the calculations.
Okay.
So in terms of the problem of taking the net of the sales for that product for that month, that is no issue. It's already done.
Right.
We actually, as an aside, we actually calculate the credits first and then the sales secondly in that month for that product. We found that we can save you nickels and dimes and dollars if we will reduce the amount owed first as opposed to have it, calculated as it was seen on the spreadsheet randomly. If it's a sliding scale like this, it actually goes up and down the scale like it's supposed to. So it backs it off and then it adds it in. And so as it backs it off, if it passes one of these break levels, then it takes the next lower percentage, and as it backs it up and it goes over a break level, it takes the next higher percentage. So you might have a sale of, let's say they're sitting at 1,090 units, 1,990 units in this example of 2,000 here. Well, 10 units, and they sell 50 units. Well, 10 units will be at 15%, and 40 units will then be at 17%.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to save that out, but if I wanted to see, for instance, all my royalty categories, I could see that for this particular category, a wholesale clubs category and a Canadian schedule. You can also clearly see that you can mix and match calculation methods even within a single schedule. Let's say this one was actually list. It's unlikely that this will happen. I've never seen that experience, but the system doesn't care. It'll work anyway, so I like to point it out.
Okay.
We also have the ability to create a subtable within a table that says deep discounted product will enjoy a lesser calculation of royalty percent. So here's an example of wholesale clubs, and if you sell to a wholesale club, it's not 50%; it's probably 65 or some nonsense number like that. But so it says here the first break is at 49%. You're going to get 4% and 10% on these breaks, and the next is 50% and the greater. You're going to get 4% and 8%. So you can actually vary all this as you wish.
I
And-
see.
And here's Canadian schedule, and it's a little different, and what have you. When you run out of that particular schedule, let's say 5001, and it says, oh, I don't have any more left, so it just backs off to the last one in that list, so of that particular schedule, all right? Now, as you calculate your royalties, you have a lot of stuff that you can do. We can see any prior statement balances, prior reserve balances,